It was a quiet Sunday evening in September 1971 when the Duvall family sat down for dinner in their countryside home just outside Asheville, North Carolina. The sky was tinged with the golden hues of sunset, and the soft rustling of trees could be heard through the open windows. The Duvall home, a modest two-story farmhouse nestled between rolling fields and dense woods, stood peacefully in the fading light. It was the kind of house that seemed to whisper stories from its wooden floorboards and creaking staircases. Inside, the aroma of roast chicken filled the air. Mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh cornbread completed the table, each dish arranged with care by Linda Duvall, a loving mother known in the neighborhood for her warm heart and even warmer kitchen. Her husband, James, a quiet but kind man who worked at the local hardware store, sat at the head of the table, carving the chicken with practiced ease. Their daughter Emily, 12 years old, and son Mark, just 9, were already giggling and whispering secrets, waiting eagerly for dessert. It was a typical Sunday tradition. Family dinner followed by card games, and, sometimes, James would pull out his old guitar to sing a song or two. Their home glowed with comfort. The children's backpacks lay by the staircase, ready for school the next day. The dog, Baxter, a lazy golden retriever, snoozed under the table. There was no indication, not even the slightest suggestion, that anything was out of the ordinary. But outside, as the sun dipped below the Blue Ridge Mountains, a strange stillness began to settle over the property. The wind stopped. The trees no longer swayed. Even the chirping of birds and insects ceased, as if nature itself was holding its breath. As the family laughed and passed food around the table, something changed. Neighbors, who lived a few hundred yards down the road, later recalled hearing what they described as an ear-piercing scream. Sharp and sudden, around 7:47 p.m. It rang out just once, and then silence. Absolute, unnatural silence. They assumed at the time it might have been a coyote or perhaps kids playing, so no one thought to investigate. The next morning, however, something felt wrong. James Duvall hadn't shown up for his early shift at the hardware store. Linda didn't walk Emily and Mark to the school bus like she usually did. Calls to the house rang unanswered. One neighbor, an older woman named Ruth Simmons, decided to walk over and check in. What she found triggered one of the most baffling investigations the town had ever seen. The Duvall home looked untouched from the outside. The car was parked in the driveway, and the porch light was still on, flickering faintly in the daylight. Ruth knocked on the door. No answer. She peeked through the front window and froze. The dining table was still set. Plates of food remained as if the family had simply gotten up mid-meal. She called the police. When officers arrived, they forced the door open and entered cautiously. What they saw was chilling. The house was in perfect condition. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no scattered belongings. The living room was neat. The children's toys were where they had left them. The kitchen smelled faintly of the previous night's dinner. The chicken was now cold, and the mashed potatoes had started to harden. But everything else was undisturbed. For plates sat on the dining table, each with a slice of cherry pie untouched. The chairs were slightly askew, as though each person had stood up in a hurry. The silverware had clattered to the floor near 2 of the seats. A glass of milk was tipped over, but not broken. Its contents now dried in a small puddle on the wooden floor. The scene was hauntingly still. Like the Duvall's disappearance quickly captured national attention. Within days, major newspapers ran headlines about the vanishing family of Asheville. News crews set up outside the property, filming the eerily untouched home. Footage of the perfectly set dinner table and untouched desserts aired on televisions across the country. People were both fascinated and frightened. How could 4 people disappear so completely, in the middle of dinner, without leaving behind a single trace? Local police joined forces with state investigators and even brought in the FBI. Their search efforts were relentless. For weeks, teams combed through the dense Appalachian woods surrounding the Duval property. Search dogs were deployed, but they couldn't pick up a scent past the edge of the Duval's backyard. Every stream, cave, and ditch was investigated. Helicopters scanned the hillsides with thermal cameras. Dozens of volunteers formed human chains, scouring the ground inch by inch. Yet nothing was found. Not a single footprint. No scraps of clothing. No signs of a struggle or escape. The family's personal belongings, wallets, IDs, Linda's wedding ring, even James's house keys, were still in the house. The children's school books were stacked neatly on the table. It was as if the Duvals had stood up from their meal and simply evaporated into thin air. Then came the detail that baffled everyone even more. Their dog, Baxter, was found locked in the basement. No one knew how he got there. The door had been latched from the outside. The dog had been barking nonstop, as if desperate to be heard or saved. He was unharmed but visibly shaken, pacing in circles, refusing to eat for 2 days. Some said he never acted the same again. It was the only living presence left in the house. As the investigation dragged on without answers, theories began to form, some rational, some bizarre. The most logical theory was abduction, but that didn't make sense. Who would take an entire family without signs of force or entry? There were no ransom notes, no demands, no evidence of a planned escape. The house had a single landline, which had never received or made a call after 6:50 p.m. that night. Surveillance wasn't common in 1971, and no one nearby had seen or heard anything useful. Then came the stranger theories. Paranormal investigators from as far as California came to visit the house. Some claimed the land was cursed, possibly tied to older stories about mysterious disappearances in the region dating back to the 1800s. There were legends of people wandering into the woods and never returning, stories mostly dismissed as folklore. But now, those old tales gained new weight. Residents began reporting strange happenings near the Duval house. Teenagers daring each other to get close to the windows said they saw shadows moving inside. One girl claimed to see a small handprint on the glass when no one was inside. Another swore she heard children giggling, though the house was dark and locked. Elderly neighbors told police they heard whispers when they passed by the property at night, soft, unintelligible murmurs that would stop the moment they turned to look. Rumors spread quickly. Some said the Duvals were taken by something not human, a force that lived within the house or the land itself. Theories included everything from time slips to interdimensional rifts. A few even believed the house was built on a site where dark rituals once occurred, though there was no record of anything like that. Still, nothing concrete ever surfaced. And with no evidence to move the case forward, the authorities had no choice. After months of dead ends, false leads, and failed theories, the investigation was officially closed. The Duval home was abandoned. Nature began to reclaim the house. Weeds pushed through cracks in the driveway. Vines crept up the wooden siding. The paint peeled, and windows shattered over time. Birds nested in the rafters. The roof sagged in places, and the front porch groaned under its own weight. For the town of Asheville, the house became a place of fear and fascination. Kids would dare each other to run up to the porch and knock. Some came back white-faced, claiming they felt something cold grip their shoulder. Others refused to even walk down the road it sat on. The Duval family slowly became a myth, a warning told to children when they wandered too far from home or stayed out after dark. "Don't end up like the Duvals," parents would say, half jokingly, but with a chill in their voice. The house was nicknamed the Still House, not because it made moonshine, but because of what police had said when they entered it that night. "It's too still in there. Too quiet. Like time just stopped." And then, for over 5 decades, nothing changed. No new evidence. No new leads. No one bought the house. It just stood there, rotting in silence, as if guarding the secret it refused to share. Until one day, 52 years later, something shifted. In the spring of 2023, a demolition crew was sent to the property. The town had finally approved the removal of the old structure, citing safety hazards. It was time, they said, to erase the last haunted trace of a mystery no one could solve. But what the crew found that day, in the attic, buried under a loose floorboard, was an old, dust-covered camera. And that camera would change everything. In March of 2023, after decades of silence and decay, the Duval house was finally scheduled for demolition. The once proud farmhouse, now leaning and cracked with time, had become nothing more than a weather-beaten skeleton, a place kids dared each other to enter and adults avoided entirely. After years of failed attempts to sell the land and multiple complaints from nearby residents about trespassers and vandalism, the town council approved its removal. It was time to put the ghost story behind them, or so they thought. The demolition team arrived early in the morning. The air was cold and damp, thick with mist that hadn't yet lifted from the surrounding woods. The crew had strict instructions: clear the house room by room before the structure could be torn down. Every inch had to be documented for safety. Leading the job was a contractor named Mike Harper, a local man in his early 40s, known for being level-headed and thorough. Mike wasn't one for ghost stories. To him, the Duval house was just another condemned building with warped floors and mold-infested walls. But even he had to admit there was something unsettling about the place. From the moment he stepped onto the porch, a strange hush seemed to follow him. No birds, no wind, just a constant stillness, as though the house itself was holding its breath. By the time Mike made his way up the narrow staircase to the attic, the rest of the crew was outside unloading equipment. The stairs creaked loudly with every step, and the air grew colder the higher he climbed. The attic door was swollen from years of moisture and stuck when he tried to open it. After a few solid pushes, it finally gave way, groaning open with a reluctant sigh. Dust swirled in the air like 1,000 tiny ghosts. Cobwebs clung to the rafters like drapes. The attic, though small, was packed with forgotten objects: a broken rocking chair, a box of yellowed newspapers, old children's shoes, and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. It smelled of mildew, wood rot, and something else, something metallic and faintly burnt. Mike pulled out his flashlight and began sweeping the beam across the room. That's when he noticed something odd. Near the back corner of the attic, where the floorboards had buckled slightly, something glinted. He crouched down and brushed away the debris. Tucked tightly between two warped floorboards was a small object wrapped in aged, brittle cloth. He carefully pried it loose and unfolded the fabric. In his hands was an old Polaroid land camera, dusty, scratched, but surprisingly intact. The strap was frayed, and one corner of the body was dented, but the lens appeared untouched. It looked as if someone had hidden it intentionally. Mike didn't know much about vintage cameras, but he recognized the weight of it in his hand. He turned it over and popped open the back. To his surprise, there was a film cartridge still inside. Old, faded, but there. He debated what to do. Part of him wanted to throw it in the toolbox and move on, but something about the way it had been hidden made him pause. This didn't feel like trash. It felt like a message waiting to be read. After the shift ended, Mike brought the camera to the local historical society, located just off Main Street. There he met with Evelyn Clark, a historian who specialized in the town's lesser-known archives. She had studied the Duval case for years, and even led a small group that believed the family's disappearance was more than just an unsolved mystery. When Mike placed the camera on her desk, Evelyn's eyes widened. She immediately recognized the model, a Polaroid 100 series from the late 1960s. With gloved hands, She opened the back and gently removed the roll of film. It was degraded, but hadn't been fully exposed to light. There was a chance, just a slim one, that something could still be developed. She contacted a specialist in analog photography preservation, a man named Walter Greaves, who operated a private lab 2 towns over. Walter had a reputation for recovering lost images from film others had given up on. It took him a few days, but when he finally developed the roll, what he found changed everything. There were 6 photos in total. The first 5 were standard family pictures, black and white moments frozen in time. One showed Emily and Mark sitting on the front steps with their dog. Another captured Linda baking in the kitchen, flour on her hands, smiling at someone off camera. James was photographed reading the Sunday newspaper in the living room. All of them dated, handwritten on the backs, September 10th through 12th, 1971. Just days before they vanished. But it was the 6th photo that made Walter call Evelyn immediately, his voice shaking. The final image appeared to be taken from within the dining room. The entire Duval family was seated at the table. The very same table found untouched by investigators decades ago. The roast chicken, the mashed potatoes, the pie slices. It was all there, perfectly framed, as if someone had documented their final moment. But there was something else in the frame. Behind James Duval, partially obscured by the dim lighting, was a 5th figure, a tall, dark silhouette, standing motionless near the wall. Its features were blurred, distorted, and unnaturally stretched, like it was caught mid-motion, or like it didn't belong in the image at all. It had no visible face, but what looked like long, sharp fingers rested on the back of James's chair. None of the family members appeared to notice. The timestamp on the bottom edge of the photo read September 12th, 1971, 7:46 p.m. Exactly 1 minute before the scream was reported. What had started as a simple demolition job had unearthed something long buried. A camera hidden in an attic. A photo that defied explanation. And for the first time in 52 years, the Duval mystery had something new. Something terrifying. The first few photos on the roll developed from the Duval's old Polaroid camera seemed completely innocent. Peaceful, even. They were black and white snapshots frozen in time. Moments that felt both warm and haunting, knowing what would follow just days later. In one photo, Emily and Mark were caught mid-laughter, playing with their golden retriever, Baxter, in the overgrown backyard. The image was slightly grainy, but their happiness shone through clearly. In another, Linda stood in the kitchen, dusted in flour, smiling toward the camera as she kneaded bread dough. It looked like a scene from a 1950s family magazine. Cheerful, homely, ordinary. James was captured reading the newspaper in his recliner, slippers on, a pipe in hand. The headlines were barely readable, but the date printed on the paper matched the week the family vanished. A 4th photo showed the family car parked outside under a blooming dogwood tree. And the 5th? It was blurry, but appeared to show the family gathered in the living room, perhaps playing a board game based on the shapes spread across the coffee table. Each of these images was time-stamped between September 10th and 12th, 1971. Then came the 6th photo, and that's where everything changed. It was a single frame. One picture, but it was unlike any of the others. This final photo appeared to have been taken during dinner, the very same meal the family never finished. The camera had been placed at an angle slightly above the table, almost as if it was mounted on a shelf or held by someone standing behind a doorway. The scene was familiar to those who had seen the Duval home after the incident. Roast chicken in the center, bowls of mashed potatoes and green beans, for dinner plates, and 4 tall glasses of milk. James, Linda, Emily, and Mark were all seated in mid-bite, caught in natural, candid positions, completely unaware of the lens aimed at them. But there was something else, something that hadn't been reported in any of the official police photos taken after the disappearance. Standing directly behind James Duval's chair was a fifth figure. At first glance, it barely registered. The figure was tall, lean, and its entire form was shrouded in shadow, almost blending into the floral wallpaper behind it. Unlike the others, it didn't appear fully solid. Its edges were blurred, its features indistinct, as if the image had been taken while it was moving, or as if the figure wasn't fully there at all. No eyes, no mouth, no clothing, just a vague humanoid outline. And then the most disturbing detail of all. One of its long, unnatural hands seemed to rest on James's right shoulder. The fingers looked grotesquely long, tapering into points, almost like claws. Despite this horrifying presence, the family continued their meal, completely undisturbed. No one was looking at the figure. No one reacted. Not a single glance of fear or surprise. As far as anyone could tell, the Duvals hadn't seen it at all. The timestamp on the bottom edge of the photo read, September 12, 1971, 7:46 p.m. Exactly 1 minute before the scream was heard by neighbors. 1 minute before the family vanished without a trace. The photo sent a ripple of unease through everyone who saw it. It was unlike anything the investigation had ever produced. Evelyn Clark, the town historian who helped recover the film, was the first to notify local authorities. She also forwarded the image to various specialists for analysis, hoping someone could provide a rational explanation. What followed was a flurry of attention. Photography experts studied the image in high resolution. They ruled out typical forms of degradation or accidental exposure. The lighting, the film grain, the contrast, everything in the image aligned with the rest of the photos. There were no signs of tampering, no double exposure, no flaws in the lens that could account for the strange figure. Forensic analysts were brought in. They confirmed the timestamp was consistent with the original Polaroid's internal mechanics. No manipulation was found. The image, they said, was genuine and unexplainable. Then came the paranormal investigators. Several teams requested permission to enter the Duval house. Now partially collapsed, but still standing under protective tarps during the demolition delay. One group claimed they experienced sudden temperature drops inside, as well as unexplained equipment failures. Another team, reviewing audio from the house, claimed to pick up a whisper on their recordings, a soft voice repeating the word behind. Despite the growing hysteria, no one could determine what or who the figure was. Some suggested it was a trick of the light. Others proposed it could have been a person, a stranger, who entered the house just before the disappearance. But that theory unraveled quickly. If it had been a real intruder, why was there no evidence of forced entry, no struggle, no panic? Then a more unsettling theory emerged, that the figure wasn't human at all. Skeptics scoffed, of course, but believers latched onto the idea that this was proof the Duvals had encountered something not of this world, something that appeared moments before they vanished, something that had been watching them without their knowledge. More questions followed. Who took the photo? Did one of the Duvals set a timer? Was someone else in the house that night? And most terrifying of all, could this shadow-like entity still be tied to the location? Despite the exhaustive analysis, the image remained a mystery. No one could explain how the photo had survived 5 decades, hidden in an attic without being damaged. No one could explain how the film had avoided degradation or exposure. And no one could explain what the figure was or why it showed up only in that final frame. The photo was placed into an evidence vault under heavy security. Digital copies were made, but restricted from the public. A few leaked versions found their way online, but were quickly taken down. Authorities claimed they were hoaxes, manipulated recreations. But those who had seen the original said the real image was far more disturbing. One thing became chillingly clear. Something else had been in the house that night. Something the Duvals hadn't seen. Something that may have been waiting and watching just before it took them, following the shocking discovery of the final photo, the Duval case. Long considered a cold file, buried under decades of unanswered questions, was suddenly reopened. For the first time in over 50 years, new attention was brought to what many considered the most unsettling unsolved disappearance in North Carolina's history. The photo didn't provide closure, far from it. In fact, it only created more mystery. Law enforcement, with the help of advanced modern technology, launched a fresh investigation. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in to search beneath the Duval property. Beneath the cracked foundation, the dirt floors of the basement, even beneath the overgrown yard that surrounded the home. They were looking for anything, bones, objects, evidence of a shallow grave. But nothing was found. Not a scrap of fabric. Not a fragment of remains. Specialists examined the house from top to bottom. Walls were scanned using thermal imaging and sonar equipment. Floors were pried up. Soil samples were tested. DNA sweeps were performed throughout the structure. All results came back clean, eerily clean, in fact, as if the house had been untouched by the living for decades, and yet preserved in a way that made no sense. It was like it had remained sealed in time, immune to decay, immune to human traces. Then, things began to take an even darker turn. Mike Harper, the contractor who had discovered the camera in the attic, began experiencing strange symptoms. He initially brushed them off as stress or exhaustion, night terrors, insomnia, and sudden moments of nausea whenever he was near the Duval house. But over the next week, his condition worsened. He began experiencing episodes of sleep paralysis, describing vivid, terrifying visions of the shadow figure from the photo standing at the foot of his bed, unmoving, watching. In some dreams, he would hear whispering, like multiple voices speaking in tones he couldn't understand. One morning, just days after the investigation had resumed, Mike failed to check in with his crew. He was found later that afternoon, unconscious and lying in the attic of the Duval house. His eyes were wide open, unmoving, as though frozen in a trance. He had no visible injuries, no signs of trauma. But when paramedics arrived and tried to rouse him, they were met with something chilling. Mike's lips were moving. He was whispering a single sentence over and over in a dry, cracked voice. "They're still here. They're still here." He was hospitalized for several days, kept under observation. Eventually, he regained full consciousness, but he refused to speak about what happened in the attic. In fact, he refused to talk about the house at all. He left the contracting company and moved out of Asheville entirely. According to sources close to him, he has never returned, not even to visit family. That alone might have been dismissed as coincidence or psychological trauma, if not for what happened next. A documentary crew, working on a film about infamous American disappearances, was granted limited access to the Duval home before it would be permanently sealed by authorities. The crew set up motion-triggered cameras, audio recorders, and thermal sensors. They were skeptical, of course. Their aim was to capture the story, not to chase ghosts. But something unexpected was caught on tape. While filming in the dining room, the very room from the photo, one of the crew members noticed a draft, despite all windows being sealed. A moment later, a door behind them, which had been shut for hours, creaked open on its own. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, documented on their sensors, from 71 degrees down to just over 40 in less than 10 seconds. And then, something even stranger. On playback, the crew discovered a faint sound captured by their directional microphone, a child's voice, barely audible. But after filtering the noise, the words became clear. "Help us!" Everyone present that night swore no one else was in the house. No children, no open radios, no recordings playing in the background. The footage was sent for analysis and reviewed by audio specialists. The voice couldn't be traced to any crew member or external interference. It didn't match any known samples, and it seemed to come from within the room, close to the microphone. After that incident, the documentary team abandoned filming. The director released a brief statement saying that some stories were too real to retell. Despite renewed interest in modern tools, the Duval family has never been found. No remains, no confessions, no evidence of them leaving the house willingly or otherwise. Many now believe they were victims of something beyond understanding, something supernatural, a force or presence tied not just to the house, but possibly to the camera itself. Some say that taking the final photo might have been a trigger, that whoever took the picture captured something not meant to be seen, and in doing so, invited it into the room. Skeptics have argued that the image is nothing more than a trick of the light. They claim the figure in the photo could be a smudge, or a byproduct of aging film and the power of suggestion. They say people see what they expect to see, that a half-century of rumors and stories has shaped the narrative more than the evidence ever could. But those who have stood inside that house, even for a moment, speak of a different kind of fear. Not just fear of what happened in the past, but a lingering presence, a sensation that something is still watching, still waiting. The town of Asheville has never been the same. To this day, no one lives within a mile of the Duval property. The path to the house is overgrown, blocked by rusted gates and weather-worn signs that simply read "No trespassing." Kids no longer dare each other to enter. Locals cross the street rather than walk past it. The house itself has since been sealed by the state, with plans to bury the structure rather than demolish it. No one wants to risk disturbing whatever may remain inside. And the camera? It now sits locked away in a steel evidence box, stored deep inside a secure vault at an undisclosed location. Access is restricted. The final photo has never been released to the public. But those who've seen it, police officers, analysts, investigators, all agree on one thing. They can't forget it. Some can't sleep. Some refuse to speak about it. Some left their jobs altogether. But all of them say the same thing in different ways. Something else was in that house. And whatever it was, it didn't leave. So the question still hangs in the air, unanswered, unshakable. Did the Duval family vanish into thin air? Or were they taken by something that doesn't live, but waits?